military manner, if you like. So you eat, sleep, work together. Not literally sleep together, but you know what I mean. So you've got buildings where you've got a refectory, dormitory, etc., etc. Now, the Eastern tradition from Egypt, Syria, etc., was more during the period of persecutions. You had a load of individuals who might go out into the desert and might see caves and say, like, you know, Seth and I have been married 46 years. We've embraced religion seriously. We go out and we have our little clandestine worships in the desert, and we spotted a nice cave. But when we get there, we actually say, oh look, there are two of them. Tell you what, why don't you go and live in that one, and I'll go and live in that one, and we'll meet on Sundays for worship. And so it's like a dispersed community of people following their own spiritual path, but within communion together and worshipping together. So it's a very different sort of thing. And when we look at these 4th century mud huts in the monastery of St Anthony's in Egypt, we can see that the same arrangement is observed in the 6th century at Skellig Michael off of the southwest tip of Ireland. And this is going to a desert. The Irish call such places deserts. They're a watery wilderness, okay? And if you haven't got water, you might go into an island on a fen. If you're landlocked, you come to a site like Billingham, which we'll look at presently. These beehive huts. Right, okay, so during the course of the 6th century, the myriad of refugee groups and mercenaries and war bands who are coming over and attacking from the continent, as well as the Picts and the Irish, putting pressure on the post-Roman Empire and managed to carve out an awful lot of territories and kingdoms. By about 700, the big fish have swallowed up the little fish, and we're left with the big kingdoms of Essex, Sussex and Wessex. So those are Saxons, and you'll see a lot of things around here that talk about the Saxon graves. They're not Saxons, generally. Okay, Anglo-Saxons, but the peoples of Northumbria are generally Angles. You get a mixture, and we just spent this afternoon going and having a look at the Loftus Princess. Anybody seen her? At Kirkleatham Museum. Well, go and see her soon if you haven't, because they're going to close the gallery for refurbishment. And it's a really important burial. It's sort of like a mini Sutton Hoo of the North, and it's a woman, a young woman of about 19, buried on a bed with the most incredible jewellery with Christian associations, possibly a very young abbess. Okay? So if you want to see a woman from the period that we'll be talking about here, Hild, etc., go and have a look at the Loftus Princess. It's a really good trip, and there's a lot to see there other than that as well. Now, Lindisfarne, Holy Island, where the Lindisfarne Gospels was made, which is up near Berwick-on-Tweed, takes its name, Lindisfarne, the travellers from Lindsey. And Lindsey is the area around Lincoln, which had been a Roman veterans colony, where old soldiers were given land to make a Romanised town. And it seems that the Angles who settled in East Anglia then moved up the coast, right up the way to Lindisfarne, and they're instrumental in establishing a kingdom in the north called Northumbria. Now that's not the Northumbria that we think about in local government terms today, it's everything north of the River Humber. Okay? And gradually they take over other kingdoms of ancient British kingdoms of the Old North, such as Reged in Dumfries and Galloway, Strathclyde, and right the way up to the Edinburgh-Glasgow line, and then even further up from there. And then you've got Angles in Mercia, the people of the Marches, who have to drive a wedge into the very heart of the centre of the country. And then you've got, in Kent, you've got a different sort of group, which Bede says were Jutes from southern Scandinavia, southern Denmark. Again, the bands are more mixed. But interestingly enough, the Loftus Princess, her grave goods show that she's got a background in Kent or Essex. Okay? So you had Essex girls up here about in the 7th century. And so Sutton Hoo is a great shipbuilding of about 620. So you've got people mixing it a bit. And then of course we've got Wales. Anybody know where the derivation of the name Wales comes from? Wales. That's what the Anglo-Saxons called the others, the strangers. Okay? So Welsh means strange or other, and Cornwall is often referred to as West Wales as well. And so you see the Romano-British and late Iron Age peoples who survive tend to get pushed into the upland territories where you haven't got the best farming land, etc. Okay? And Brittany, of course, is very much linked through as well. Right, have we got all of that sorted in our minds? Well done. Okay. So, how, as a Christian, whether you've toughed it out in the post-Roman period and tried to keep your faith alive, or if you've come from Ireland and through Mull and Pickland or through South Wales, etc., and you've got your traditions, what's it going to be like when you meet the big buggers who live somewhere like this? Who define themselves by how much mead they can drink, how many women they can bed, and the ancestors who've done likewise. Now, if you go into their hall and start evangelising on your soapbox and telling them that their ancestors are burning in the fiery pit, you're going to join them pretty quickly, okay? And so what you find is actually a process of getting to think about, well, how could people have sought God and how did that express itself before they had the gospel and that teaching? Okay, so that's how some of this is framed. So this is the sort of hall of the sort of Beowulf mentality that they're encountering in Germany and southern Scandinavia, and that they're making at places like Rendlesham, and in the north at places like Yevering, Adgefrin, wonderful new visitor centre there I recommend to you, with a whisky distillery chaps, you'll have a lovely time, and Bangor, etc. So these are the big halls of the kings who've risen above the others, often by battle. Now, in 596, the Pope sends Augustine from Rome. He finally gets to Canterbury in 597, having turned back 6 times en route. Everywhere he went, they said to him over dinner, "You don't want to go there." But eventually he did. And the reason he aimed for Canterbury, not London, because Pope Gregory's plan was to pick up where the late Roman Empire had left off when it was the state religion, around 400, where you had an archbishop in London and an archbishop in York for the 2 provinces of Roman Britain. But of course London is in the hands of the Essex girls, and they're not at all friendly to the new religion. But in Kent, the king, Ethelbert, has married a Christian princess called Bertha. Anyway, you saw her briefly there just now, yeah? And one of the agreements is that she could carry on worshipping her faith. So there's a little church called St Martin's just outside the Roman walls in the old Roman cemetery, where she and her confessor carried on worshipping. And when Augustine comes and she's persuaded the king to actually give him a hearing, he sets up his first base in that little church of St Martin's and then builds an abbey on the site of St Augustine's Abbey today. Now, by the time one of his followers, Miletus, makes it to London and founds St Paul's Cathedral, where I used to be a canon once upon a time, and member of chapter of my sins, he writes to Gregory the Great and he says, "I'm here, boss. What do I do? They've got religions already." And Gregory says, "There's a party going on, join in. If it's a place where people have bought their hopes and their fears for centuries, be it a holy well, standing stone, unless there's evil going on, blood sacrifice, embrace it, make it your own. Say that was then, this is our new teaching, and take what's good and carry it forward." Okay? And so we find that if you go to Rudston, in East Yorkshire, you'll see the biggest phallus you'll ever see in your life, girls. And it's a massive prehistoric standing stone, and you'll note that the church, which is on very early foundations, is right up next to the stone. Yeah? And Easter takes its name from the Germanic goddess Eostra. So there's an attempt to actually, not syncretism, but to actually say, well, this is, your worship has been geared often to the agricultural year, and the church calendar is often geared to, again, the same passing of the year and the saints and the historical points that are attached to it. Okay, so gradually the north is established, and Northumbria is formed out of two ancient Celtic kingdoms called Bernicia in the north of the Tees, and Deira in the south, with Yeavering and Bamborough as the focuses of Bernicia, up near Holy Island, and York as the main focal point of Deira. Okay? And there's a lot of umming and ahhing and fighting amongst the different kings who claim both territories until they're actually merged into one kingdom called Northumbria by the 8th century. Now this is an artist's impression of Yeavering. You can see it's even got a sort of carved cheese triangle, which is a wooden version of a Roman amphitheatre. Now this may be where in 627 Paulinus is sent up from Kent because he's accompanied a princess from Kent who's Christian called Ethelberga to marry the pagan king of Northumbria, Edwin. Or was he? In my new book, which is coming out next Easter, called Spirit of the North, the Lindisfarne Gospels and the Northern Saints, you'll see that there's quite a lot of evidence to show Edwin had already been baptised and Christianised by a priest from Reged, Galloway, and he had another wife. But now it's politically expedient for him to ally with Kent, and so there's another Christian ceremony, perhaps. But in 627 is going to be commemorated next year with a lot of things, including a festival and baptisms in the river of the sort that Paulinus conducted. So make your way up to Yeavering for the celebrations next year. There'll be a lot of fun stuff going on to commemorate it. So 627, it's going well. The royal court is engaging in mass baptisms, and the happy royal couple are celebrating, etc. But in 633, King Edwin was killed in battle. Now, when the king lost his head, literally, it was everybody out. And it's as much as Paulinus can do to get the Queen and the royal children back to Kent safely. They leave one person behind to carry on the mission. It's a deacon called James. We ought to celebrate him more. And so he does his stuff. And the other name that comes through to us, somebody who was baptised at Yeavering in 627 and who stayed and toughed it out, was Hild, who founded Hartlepool and Whitby. And she was Edwin's niece. Now, she must have been a remarkable woman. Princesses were traded about like nobody's business at this period, but she never married, she never had children, although by all accounts she was very personable, and she managed to do her own thing. And she followed her faith. The next king to take over, who came back out of exile when Edwin was killed, and who had spent his formative years studying Christianity in Iona, in western Scotland, was Oswald. The minute he got to Bamborough, he sent back to Iona and asked them for missionaries to convert his people. Okay, I'm going over time, aren't I?
No, keep going.
Is that all right? To convert his people, which he does. Aidan, a very humble, simple Irishman, who would convert people literally by walking the fields. He walked massive distances. The king at one point gives him his Tesla, his best white horse. And Aidan says, I don't want it. I walk, I meet people, I talk. We pass the time of day, I get to know what their lives are like. And this is how he started the conversion. So the first poor man he sees, he gives the horse to the poor man. and the king has to take it on the chin. Okay. So it's the idea that you don't pander to power, you don't look for advancement, you don't look for lands, you don't look for money, you model it by living it. You walk the walk. And it proved incredibly popular. And these were the people that went out to communities in the middle of Cumbrian valleys, etc. Bede says at one point Cuthbert in the 680s actually goes to a place in Cumbria where there's cannibalism taking place because people are starving to that extent. These aren't just the fairy tale figures of sermons and picture books. These are real people with real situations of doubt, danger and dilemma who did remarkable things. And these are the buildings that survive to bear testimony to the fact that many generations have honoured that. Or at least that's the theory, we hope they've honoured it. And I think they're still really important as beacons. Whether you believe in Christianity or not, they are important as beacons of how amazing things were done bottom up. But also a reminder that when you look too much at a pyramid and a hierarchy and things become ends justify means and process and structure, you've got to keep that spirituality and that commitment to service going. And that's why I'm talking about this to you here in this building today. Right, okay, so Lindisfarne is where the monastery is set up, and this is the little island just off the bay in Lindisfarne, where I think the Lindisfarne Gospels was made by the Bishop of Lindisfarne, Eadfrith, in between the years 715 and his death in 722. Because for the 40 days of Lent, the 40 days of Advent, the busy bishop who ran a diocese that ran right the way up from Alnwick to Edinburgh and Glasgow was allowed to go on retreat and undertake his own prayer. And that remarkable book is the work of one person. But the skins needed for it show that every farm of every free man, every monastery, every king and noble in the northeast and beyond would have donated skins. So one saintly person undertaking it as a back-breaking, migraine-inducing work of sheer devotion and active prayer to change his world, with the whole community making a contribution. And when you drag your granny 300 miles from Miracle of Healing to the shrine of Cuthbert on Holy Island, or any of the big shrines in his name at places where his coffin rested in later years, or Hild and others, you would see a book of the eye altar. If you wanted to observe Christianity by freeing all your slaves and changing your life and your economy in accordance with your teaching, yeah, you would come to one of these books and you would swear it in front of it, and it might be entered on the fly leaves, etc. These are transformative things. And when you came here with your granny and you spent your 5 minutes next to the candle-lit masterpiece, and you've come from the humdrum earthenware reality of your everyday life, and somehow, suddenly, there's a universe out there. There's a multiverse, and it's light and it's colour, and all of the flora and fauna and the elements are in there. And you, sir, are bewitched by the animal intellects that remind you of the belt buckle that your great-great-grandfather had left you, who was a federal auxiliary in the Roman army and had his Germanic ornament, whereas the lovely lady in front here is bewitched by the Celtic Latin spiral work and the brooch that she's received from her Irish great-grandmother. And so there's something for everybody in there. Even if those peoples are at war and enmity, they're shown in harmony. And it's on letters that are in Greek characters as well as Latin. And it's an encyclopedia of everything from Skellig Michael on the west of Ireland to the deserts of Syria and Judea. If we were all to go out now, and I'm up for it if you are, and go to the latest Irish, Italian, Lebanese fusion restaurant in Billingham, you'll see things on the menu that summon up whole Serengetis, yeah? And that's what books like this do. They represent a vision of how it could be if we lived with one another and we lived with all creatures and the elements in harmony. It's an active prayer of what is possible and what is to come, even if we bugger it up here. Okay. Right. I'm going forward. Social justice is a big part of it as well. Many of the men and women died in the course of their work, and when the Irish finally leave Holy Island, it's found that there wasn't money, there weren't houses, there were simple huts, etc., because there was no need to provide houses for the entertainment of the great men of the world, for such never resorted to the church, except to pray and hear the word of God. For the whole care of those teachers was to serve God, not the world, to feed the soul and not the body. So it's a different ethos, and this is what those monasteries would have looked like. So if you're thinking about what Billingham might have looked like, if it was here around 700, this is a one-person hermitage, but you would have had a rack, a stone or earth rampart that was divided into different portions, one for praying and writing and studying, another for reception of people from outside into the church, with a burial ground, an area for metalworking and other industrial activities, and then farming areas, and lay people perhaps even attached in the outer wrath around it. So that's how these simple early monasteries of this Columban and Cuthbertine tradition would have been. Cuthbert became the Bishop of Lindisfarne in 685 and died in a little hermitage like this on the inner farms in 687. Okay? So it's very different from others who take a route of let's get a lot of lands, let's get a lot of money, let's have big churches and stone buildings. Not necessarily one right and one wrong, it's different approaches. Okay? So, the first law in the world protecting women, children and non-combatants was done as a collaboration between Ireland, Northumbria and even Cornwall in the 680s. We could do with their ilk today, really. That's remarkable achievements. Okay, right, now, for the last bit, Billingham. Now, we talk a lot about Aidan, we talk a lot about Cuthbert, we talk a lot about Benedict Biscop and Bede at Mount Weymouth and Jarrow and the great learning there. The greatest brain in the post-Roman world was a boy from Roca who entered a monastery at 7, stayed there for the rest of his life, wrote the best guidebook to the Middle East that people were still using in the early 20th century, having only ever been to Holy Island and York, who knew the constellation and the ordering of the solar system, but thought everything revolved around us rather than the sun, and who worked out gravitational pull of the moon, and who wrote the first tide timetables, which you disregard at your peril unless you want your SUV to be wrecked on the causeway and have to be hairlifted off. But it's not just them. In the 640s and 50s, there were a group called the Boys from Holy Island. St Ced, St Chad, St Cailin and St Kynable. Chad went on to found a number of monasteries and became the Bishop of Lichfield and was a great missionary to eastern England, parts of Northumbria and Mercia, and died of plague in 672 in Lichfield. And his brother Ced, who died in 664, who evangelised Mercia, the East Saxons, East Anglia, and who did the translating at the big punch-up of the Synod of Whitby, where which party was going to win the day in their practices. Are we going to be local? Are we going to go European, basically? Okay. And bear in mind in this time, it's not Celtic versus Roman. We're not talking about Roman Christianity. Until the 10th century, effectively, the church in Britain was part of international orthodoxy, answerable ultimately to Constantinople. It's whether you wanted to be part of that international ecumen or whether you wanted your own local traditions and practices. Okay. Now, Ced was very active He was sent into East Anglia and to Essex, where he founded Bradwell-on-Sea, near Morden in Essex, in a Roman fort. And Tilbury, if you ever go through the Dartford crossing, that ghastly factory billowing out smoke on the North Shore is the site of Ced's Monastery at Tilbury. It's also where Bram Stoker set Dracula's summer residence. So there's something about the psychogeography of that site that's really weird. And this is the price that you pay. 661, newsflash. Good King Sigebert II of Essex, patron of Ced of Holy Island, founder of Bradwell, assassinated. 2 noble thanes, brothers, his own kinsman, executed for murder. Their defence when they were asked, why did you kill your lord? We had to do it. He turned Christian and soft and forgave his enemies. Hidden motives suspected as king criticised one brother's steamy love life. Brother Bede. Kings could be assassinated, they could be confined in prison, in monasteries, all sorts of things. And Ced was instrumental in all this. Now, how did Ced get from Holy Island to Tilbury? That's our question we're going to end with. We're looking at how Billingham fits into it. Well, one of the places he found is Lastingham on the North York Moors. Okay, so that's in the Vale of Pickering, between York and Whitby, basically. Okay, and Bede tells us that on his journey south, down to Lincoln and then to Essex, he founded many, many monasteries, as did his brothers. Okay, we've only got 2 or 3 of them whose names we know, but there were many, many more. Lastingham was kind of a main centre for Ced and Chad, and one of their brothers, Carnabil, looked after it. Caelan was the local king's confessor. So, you know, they're all active. And Escombe, of course, if you look at Escombe, you've got the best preserved 7th century, late 7th, early 8th century church in the northeast, and it's not even mentioned in Bede. We don't know who founded it, but we know they were around. That could well be what Billingham looked like, around about 700, 720, or was it more the Celtic simple form? Having said that, by the 720s, they'd really gone along the Mount Wearmouth Jarrow route and had replaced the early huts in dressed masonry. Okay? So we've got options of how it might have been. Hartlepool. There's been wonderful archaeological work done there in recent decades and very recently. Of course, it was related to Guisborough Priory later. And a lot of the areas that we think of now separately are very much networked. They're part of federations. Any monastery that had been founded by one of the boys from Lindisfarne, or Hild, who again was one of the protégés of Aidan, and her nuns, and she founded double monasteries of men and women living lives in parallel. Whenever that happened, it's a peculiarity you only find in Ireland, Britain, and parts of northern France with which we were related. It's an Eastern thing ultimately. And whenever that happened, it was always a woman who was in charge. It was an abbess, because women were deemed to have better moral probity. Okay? Right. Okay, so they're networked. So they're supra-territorial. They didn't own their allegiance primarily to the local king or his representative. They owed it to God and the family of foundations and monasteries that they were a part. So if Billingham was a Cuthbertine monastery or a Hild monastery, it was ultimately part of the Federation of Lindisfarne. Right? Yeah. And it would have been well networked. And they had monasteries on the staging posts for their widespread travels. Until the 18th and early 19th century, most of the road system in Britain was still the Roman road network and the prehistoric trackways. And then they get upgraded and you've got military roads, etc. added. And that's very much true in this area. You can track some of their journeys. This is the reconstruction of what they think Hild's monastery was like when it was founded in 649. 649, and then she went on to found Whitby in 657. And you've got the church is down by what's now the seawall on the headland. and you've got where the current church of St Hild that was rebuilt by the Bruce family, Robert the Bruce and his family, is where one of two monastic enclaves were with wooden huts, presumably one for men, one for women, in a double monastery. And then you've got the Watergate with a holy well, a Chalcedon healing spring on the beach. And then you've got agricultural elements. You've got another little set of buildings up here that may have been for female novices. And then you've got places for lay people, lay villages coming out of it, and industrial areas where work is being done, and then the field systems. That's very much in the Irish mode, yeah? Was that what Billingham was like? We know from things that were found at Billingham that there were things going on here around 700. Okay? If you look at the stones on the second window ledge along there, there's one that was thought to be 9th century, but when you turn it over, it's one of the name stones that you find at Lindisfarne and Hartlepool and their dependencies to mark the graves and act as pillow stones for the dead in Egyptian Coptic fashion. And on the back of it is a circa 700s, 720s one of Lindisfarne, Hartlepool type. So do have a look at that. It's the cross with the little circles on the end of its arms. So we know something is going on here. Is it Hild and part of her federation? Is it one that's said perhaps founded on his trajectory south? I think possibly the latter. Here you've got, this is the most famous of the Hartlepool stones, and they look like the carpet pages in the Lindisfarne Gospels. This is to mark the grave of Hildolith, a nun there. And there are gold pins for veils and a beautiful little clay mould for a calf symbol blowing the trumpet of the second coming, which finds its only parallel in the Lindisfarne Gospels. So there's a lot of artifactual connection between these different places. Hart Village, just inland from the headland, has yielded 700 early Christian graves from the 7th century. So she's got another important monastery there, probably on a royal manor site. And you can see the post holes of the huts, the turned balusters from the 7th century for the stonework. Right, and the Lindisfarne Gospels, just to remind us, there's the lion with the trumpet coming out of its mouth. Okay, this is from Hart Village. That's another new name stone that they found there. 793, game changer. Lindisfarne was one of the first places in Europe to be sacked by the Vikings. Great loss of life. Fortunately, the relics, including Cuthbert's body and the Lindisfarne Gospels, survived. Now, in the 7th century, Billingham, we know, was part of the Anglo-Saxon district called Hartness, from Hart Village and the manor, which stretched from the Tees right up to Castle Eden. Okay, so that might suggest it's part of the patrimony of Hild and her foundations. The cemetery at Norton, of course, pagan cemetery, but with artefacts that show that it's on the tipping point into Christianity, give you a big population group. Sometimes these men and women wanted to go to remote deserts, sometimes they wanted to be able to preach and minister to big groups of people. Yeah, so you've got that locally here. And what is the other big important thing about this area is that Billingham stands at the entry point to the big salt pans. Salters Lane, that runs up through where I now live at the Trimdons, yeah, Sedgefield, Fishburn, etc., is an ancient prehistoric salt track. You needed salt to preserve your food to get you through the winter. Okay? And it's another crossing point, an entry to a crossing point of the Tees as well. And that's the sort of trajectory that Sed would have taken. It also stands quite close to Cades Road, which is a Roman road, which I'll show you in a moment, feeds right up to Holy Island and down into the Lincoln area. We know that around 900 Billingham was given by the Bishop of Lindisfarne at Chester Street, where they moved to a nobleman called Elfrid. So it belongs to the community of St Cuthbert by 900 when they'd settled at Chester Street and then when they moved to Durham. One of the first things that the community of Cuthbert do when they settle at Chester Street in the 880s is to start taking control of places that had been founded by their missionaries early on. Billingham's amongst them, Sedgefield is amongst them, etc. Sedgefield, said to be named for the sedgy reed. Yeah, that's a 14th century name. Before that, in the 10th century, it's Seddersfeld. St Sed's open area. And so I'm just coming up to this now. Okay, so here we've got 9th and 10th century crosses, and on the back of the 9th century one, you've got, it's a reuse of the circa 700 namestone. You've also got the very best of the namestones is from Billingham, which is now in the British Museum, and that's got a more lengthy inscription, as well as the Alpha and Omega, I am the beginning and the end, says the Lord, and a cross, and that commemorates the whole community. Okay, so the one at Billingham isn't just commemorating the individual, it's commemorating all of the monks here, fractibus, so it's men. Okay, unless the inscription elsewhere on the damaged part said women as well as likely to be men. So, Billingham's dedicated to St Cuthbert. We know the community of Cuthbert reclaimed it as soon as it possibly could after the Viking upheavals around 900. We know that around 700 it's got artefacts, and you will see many stones reused in the interior and exterior, as well as the wonderful 10th century Saxon tower and its doors into the tower that speak of the long history of a presence here which architecturally and sculpturally ties you into the network of the community of Holy Island, both in the expansion of around 700, but also from 900 onwards when they're reclaiming the heartland. Yeah? Are we convinced Billingham might well therefore be a Lindisfarne community? Yeah? The name Billingham, normally said to mean the ing, the people, and their hamlet, their settlement of following somebody called Billa. The other meaning of Billingham is it's the hamlet on the billing. A billing is like a pruning hook, yeah, a bill hook. And it's a name that's given to a particular geological feature that we get a lot in this area, which is like an island that's on the land. It's an outcrop that's shaped, not like the circular traditional Celtic churchyards, but it's longer and slightly curved. You've got it here, you've got it at Sedgefield, we've got it at Trimdon, you've got it at a number of other churches which have been rebuilt, but which retain Saxon elements such as Ormsby, etc. And we've got it very palpably here at Billingham. So we end with looking at, when you go out, look at the other side of the crossing arch, and you will see this is part of an early Saxon wall into which the arcades have been inserted. If you look at the tower doors and you look at some of the sculpture of classical style fluting, that again ties in with some of the early 8th century material. And on the outside I found two more stones tonight, a Saxon window head and a Norman window head and more sculpture. Look at it when the light's different. You need to, there's a lot here. Okay. And the tower. Now there's a lot more here that we could talk about, but this is just, to finish with, this is Cage Road. So you can see you've got a road that comes down that's kind of like the A1 basically, down from Edinburgh onto Hadrian's Wall and goes just past Holy Island and Berwick and brings you down. And then you pick up Cage Road here. And Cage Road is part of the supply route from this area right up to Hadrian's Wall, and then goes on in different routes to service the Antonine Wall. at the Edinburgh-Glasgow line, and it comes right down here. It comes through Sedgefield, and it goes through Stainton. Billingham's very close to it, and there are a whole series of churches, all of which have got Anglo-Saxon fragments and dedications to Cuthbert that take you right down through York and then cross the Humber at Brough, and Beverley is nearby, which was founded in this early period as well, and then you take you down to Lincoln, and then from there take you right the way down to Colchester, and this is where Bradwell-on-Sea is, and then if you want to London, and crosses at Tilbury, where the other monastery was. And then you've got another network of another by-road that actually takes the coastal route, which is where Hills Monasteries takes the coastal route. So Billingham can access either, and probably had a bit of a foot in both camps. So what we need to do is show people that along with the well-known centres, we've got a lot of Billingham and some of the other orphan churches. It's often said that they're dedicated to Cuthbert because by the mid-9th century, the community start going walkabout. It's normally said they leave Lindisfarne because they can't stand the heat in the kitchen because of the Viking raids. So they set off as poor refugees, wandering in the wilderness, looking for a home, and wherever Cuthbert's body rested, there a church was dedicated to St Cuthbert. My book has shown they're less refugees and more fifth columnists. They keep a presence on Lindisfarne. The sculptures carry on throughout the 9th and 10th centuries, etc. What's happened by the time that they start going walkabout properly in the 870s is the fact they become marginalised. The centre of power is no longer 9 miles away in Bamborough. It's moved to Viking HQ in York. They take the relics and they display them all the way around southern Scotland. They go out to Whithorn, Carlisle. They're visiting all of their own houses and their associates, explaining why they're moving their centre of operations and displaying the relics, which is your way of actually claiming authority and reasserting authority. They then do something rather odd for people running away from the Vikings. They go to their most southerly house, Craik, 9 miles outside of York. They stage a bloodless political coup. They overthrow the Viking leader, and they put their own Dane, Guthred, who's been converted to Christianity, on the throne. Suddenly, Alfred the Great, last man left standing, guerrilla warfare, burning cakes in the Academy marshes in Somerset, starts having visions of, you've guessed it, St Cuthbert. They're stabilising the north, they're ensuring that Christianity can carry on under pagan rule, and they're negotiating and making inroads so that Alfred can then negotiate the Dane law, the partition into the Dane law and free England, and can immediately start reaching his own agreement and eating his way into the north. Where does his grandson go on his way to try and claim overlordship of Scotland? The Shrine of Cuthbert, which by that point is at Chester Street. Okay? Chester Street is also on Cage Road. Yeah? So they carry on doing it, and there are power in the land, and there are power of actually making sure that people are still able to practice their faith. And when Aldred glosses the Lindisfarne Gospels in the 950s in Chester Street, English is there now as one of the sacred languages in the most important visible relic of Cuthbert, as well as his coffin, and English is no longer the first language of the north. This is a reassertion of the Englishness as part of the integration, the formation of a single monarchy, England, achieved by the mid-10th century. And places like this, as part of that landscape, played a really important part. Are we proud to be part of Billingham's history?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could we have lights on? Thank you very much. Now, we've got time for 1 or 2 questions, but I would ask that you speak into the microphone so that everybody can hear your question. Any questions?
You don't ask me, I ask you, and it gets unpleasant.
Well, can I just say that I thought what you had to say about St Cuthbert was absolutely fascinating. Yet another miracle, perhaps, but I was so pleased that you were showing photographs of the interior of St Cuthbert's. Please, at some point, come to one of our tours, open days, when we have tours of St Cuthbert's. Come and see it, yes, in better light, when you can see the wonderful Anglo-Saxon tower and many of the fine features inside the
And
building.
please spot the stones on the outside, because there are more to be found.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, if there are no questions, can we have a round of applause again for Michelle? I would like to show our appreciation as the Friends of St Cuthbert's for a small gift for you, Michelle.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
you didn't know I'm teetotal?
Uh,
No, I'm not. I'm not. That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Thank you all for coming along, but can I just mention our next event in this series of Anglo-Saxon related talks. On Thursday the 7th of May, we've got Martin Roberts talking about Billingham's monastic granges, Bewley, Bellis's and Billingham Grange. So please come along and watch out for us on Facebook and look at our website. And thank you very much for coming along. Thank you.
Right, Sylvia, what's your question? Okay, so B is obviously one of the main, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle.